Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learn to Love podcast, your guide to everything love, sex, intimacy, and relationships. Each week, your host, Zach Beach, interviews new experts on love, including couples therapists, relationship coaches, sex educators, and best-selling authors. Learn the best tips and cutting-edge wisdom to better love yourself, others, and the world. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, beautiful souls. I'm so positively delighted that you could join us on the Learn to Love podcast. I am your host, Zach Beach, and I'm excited to introduce our guest for today's episode, Vicki Larson. Vicki Larson is an award-winning San Francisco Bay Area journalist and the author of Not Too Old for That, and co-author of The New I Do. The former longtime lifestyles editor, writer, and columnist for the Marin Independent Journal. Her writing can also be found in the New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian, Newsweek, the Ethel, the Huffington Post, and the Greater Good Science Center. Vicki specializes in writing about living and loving outside conventional models of coupling and the nuclear family, as well as busting ageist and sexist narratives about aging as a woman and women's sexuality and desire. She came on to the show to talk about her newest book, LATitude, How You Can Make a Live Apart Together Relationship Work. On the show, we've talked a lot about unconventional structures of relationships, but have yet to tackle the idea of being in an intimate relationship with somebody while not actually sharing the same bed or room together. It was a fascinating conversation, and I hope it will be of use to you. So without further ado, let's begin. Hello, Vicki. Welcome to the show.
Well, hi, Zach. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on the show and talking to your listeners about living apart together.
Nice. And how's everything in your life so far?
You know what? I cannot complain. I played pickleball for the first time yesterday.
Oh.
And now I have to eat crow to all my friends who try to tell me how great it is because I had fun.
Joining the trend. It's hot these days. You know, there's going to be a big war between the tennis players and the pickleball players.
I think it already has started.
So I'd love to hop right into our topic for today, living apart together. And this is a very interesting topic and one we haven't quite explored before on the podcast. And I'd love to begin by talking about what shifted for you, because the very first sentence of your book reads, "For most of my life, the thought of living apart from my romantic partner just seemed stupid." So I imagine some listeners might be thinking the same thing. So what shifted for you?
As I write in my book, I'm kind of an accidental lap. Because like most people, for most of my life, I knew one romantic script, what they call the relationship escalator, right? You meet, you date, fall in love, you become a monogamous couple, you move in together, you put a ring on it, you pop out some kids, you have a house, and sometimes a minivan shows up. And that's what I knew. And so I did that twice. I got married when I was ridiculously young, a few months before my 21st birthday. That marriage did not last long. And then I got married again later in life. And then when I got married at 32 and had 2 children. And then when I got divorced at midlife, I still kind of only knew that script. So my first real long-term relationship after that marriage ended, our kids were young, but I kind of assumed that we would move in together at some point. So I would say to him like, "Oh, so do you think, we'll move in together when the kids were a little older?" And then he'd be coy and I'd be a little sad. And then in another year, I'd ask again, "Do you think you will move in together when the kids get older?" And he'd be vague and I'd be sad. And I stopped asking after a while. And it was around the time when I really just said, okay, I've had 2 marriages, 2 divorces. That script doesn't work for me anymore. And I looked at what's happening in my life. And so my kids were with their dad for 1 week and then they came with me. And at first I missed my kids a lot when they were with their dad. And then I realized the week that they were with their dad, I had unfettered freedom that I hadn't had in like 17 years, because the whole time that I was married and living with my former husband. And it felt really good. And then I started to think, this isn't so bad to have this kind of freedom. And what's interesting, Zach, is that when my sister and I left our home in New York, my mom left my dad. She didn't divorce him. She just left, went down to Florida where my sister was living, bought herself a condo, got herself a job, and they lived apart for like 10 years. And my dad would come down with Teddy, our Yorkie, once a month for a long weekend. But I was like living in Colorado with my first husband then, and I wasn't really paying attention to what my parents were doing. But at midlife, when I got divorced again, I sat down with my mom and I asked her, did she like being a wife and like being a mother, and would she have done anything different? And then I said, Mom, what the actual hell with that? And because I'd never asked her what she had done. And she said, I had enough. I will say that after many years of being a wife and a mother myself, I knew exactly what she meant. And I wouldn't recommend that people live apart together because they've had enough. But she was a role model for me. I just didn't realize it at the time. That was rebellious for a 50s era suburban mom. I mean, I didn't know anybody who had done that. So I really had it like baked into my DNA, I suppose.
So that's so interesting. I'm hearing a couple of things from your story. One is third time's a charm. It almost sounds like first two marriages were the living together relationship escalator and it didn't quite work out. And you thought, maybe I'll try something a little bit different. And the living apart together model ended up working for you. And I'm curious if you kind of look back on the first two and was like, maybe I wouldn't have gotten divorced if we had had a slightly more separate living model.
Well, okay, the first marriage, he was just the wrong person. And the second one, maybe it would have worked. You know, there were some other things going on, but I do think that if we just had not had the bad stuff happen in the second marriage, but maybe lived separately, actually might have worked. Who knows? There's no way to know. I'm not saying I would never live with anybody again. I would consider it the right person in the right situation. It's just that I think I would be much more intentional about how we're going to shape our lives. And I think a lot of times when people are living together, they kind of give up a lot of their independence and freedom, and their space. I know I did not create space in my marriages, and so that was on me. And so I would want to make sure that that happens if I ever lived with somebody again. But I've been living alone for 20 years, Zach. It's a long time.
Yeah, there's that line, make space in your togetherness. And I think many couples who are a little bit too close could use that space in their life.
It's true, because I mean, when you think about what happened in the last few years with the pandemic, if you were, lucky enough to work from home, a lot of people learned like, oh, wow, 24/7 with my partner is just way too much. So, I mean, we all got a taste of that, right? Many of us anyway,
Yes.
who live with someone. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard Esther Perel describe it as a relationship accelerator, and that it made all of the relationships that had some difficulties have a lot more difficulties. While a lot of people in still like maybe the honeymoon stage were like, oh, I love my partner, and so all I want to do is spend all day every day with them. So
Yeah.
different formats work for different
Yeah,
folks.
this is true.
And let's talk a little bit about those formats because I've been seeing more and more articles about this model and the different forms that it can take. I've seen some recommend two separate beds in the same room. I've seen separate rooms in the same house, and I've seen separate rooms entirely. So my questions to you is, first of all, is this a rising trend that we're seeing with couples? And what are some of the ways that couples do live apart together?
Yeah, well, it is a rising trend. I mean, it has been going on for a while. It's been probably more popular in England and in Europe than in the United States. In England, I think about 25% of the people who say they are single or actually have a romantic partner who lives elsewhere. And across the globe, it's about 10%. The problem is, like, we don't ask those kind of questions on censuses and things like that. Like, we will sometimes ask spouse living separately, but we don't know what that means. Are they incarcerated? Are they, deployed overseas? So there is no question about, do you have a romantic partner with whom you do not live? That's the question that we need to start asking to know if it actually is, just how much it is growing. But there's enough social scientists who realize, yes, it's growing and it needs to be studied more. And so we're seeing more studies of that. So 1, the couple considers themselves a committed couple. 2, others see them as a committed couple. And 3, they don't share the same roof. Now, I found that very restrictive in my book. And so in my book, I wanted to include people who, as you say, sleep separately, the so-called stupid sleep divorce, which is a ridiculous name. In my book, I quote Wendy Troxel. She's a sleep expert. She calls it a sleep alliance, which is a much more accurate way of describing what's happening, because you're agreeing that you need sleep. Sleep makes you better partners, and we're doing this together because it's healthy and happy. And so I include that. And I also include, people who are poly or solo poly, in that they don't have a partner living separately. They might have several partners living separately. So I wanted to be really inclusive on that. So I'm kind of fudging the definition a bit, but it speaks to more of what people are doing to make this lifestyle work. And also, one of the women I interviewed, her partner has passed, but they lived upstairs, downstairs, and then they put like a pole where they could slide down, which I thought was kind of fun. Who wouldn't want a fireman's pole to go downstairs quickly? And so they're really sharing a roof, even though they had separate spaces. So that's really how people are making it work. They're doing, it's pretty creative when you think about how people are fashioning their lives,
So we are both in the Bay Area. Very
Yeah.
expensive to live here.
Yes, it is.
And I see a lot of couples or dating relationships that jump pretty quickly into the move in together phase of the relationship. And a lot of that is simply economic reasons. Better to share the rent than split 2 separate rents, especially when you're spending a majority of your nights over at the other person's place. And I think a lot of people have this perception of this lifestyle that, yeah, it'd be great to own 2 houses separately that we both live in. So is living apart together something just for the rich and well off?
Well, that is perhaps the most common myth. And my answer is no. So when you think about it, most of us, if not all of us, are living somewhere, either alone or with family or friends or roommates. When we meet someone, date, and fall in love, we already have a place of our own. Nothing has to change. And for people who move in together, yes, of course it's cheaper to have one rent or one mortgage and one set of pots and pans and, buy the bulk toilet paper rolls at Costco and everything. Yeah, it's cheaper. What you don't want to do is turn a romantic decision, I love you and I want to live with you, into an economic decision. I need to live with you because it's cheaper. It's really important to be able to afford your life. Plus, there are other costs that aren't economic into moving in with someone. If it takes you away from your family and friends and maybe your established community, or if it takes you away from your healthcare providers, if you need to have specialists. And also, if you're moving in with a romantic partner, those often break up. Someone's going to have to move out anyway. So in talking to some of the experts, they bring up you have to be able to afford your life. So what does that look like? I interviewed one woman her partner of 18 years, has this little rustic cabin on the Central Coast in the forest in California. And she, who lives in Marin, and yeah, she needed to afford living in Marin. So she chose a co-housing community because not only was it more affordable for her, but she really wanted community around her. She wanted to have roomies. And when that co-housing community ended after about 25 years, she created another one, this time with smaller, 3 other women. They're all in their 60s and 70s. And this is how they live. So that's a creative way to do it. I mean, she could have moved in with her partner, but it's small and it's not where she wants to live and not in the ways that she wants to live. So she would have had to give up a lot of her choices to move in with her. And they drive back and forth in their Tesla, so they're not even making a big eco footprint. So I live alone. And what I do is I have a spare bedroom now that I'm an empty nester, and I Airbnb that room. And that's how I support my life. And, I'm not taking away living space, but I suppose it could be a roommate instead of Airbnb it. It's just that people get creative in how they want to live. So it isn't just for the wealthy. And also to take into consideration the other costs that aren't financial if you have to move to be closer to a new romantic partner.
I love that. Don't turn a romantic decision into an economic decision.
Right.
And
yes,
and it's absolutely true. Yeah, if you do move in prematurely, that makes
Yeah.
the breakup and the separation even more challenging.
Yes.
Now you don't have
it
any
does.
pots and pans.
That's true. You do not. You're going to have to go out and buy all that stuff again. And it's not
But
cheap.
yeah, I do love the cost of separation. One of the biggest myths to living apart together is that it's only for the rich. And what are some other myths?
Well, another one is that like you're just dating, which is because we know like what a committed couple looks like. They live together, right? That's what we know. And so that's first step, right? And then because it's just a marker, right? Otherwise you're just dating if you're kind of not living together. And or like it's friends with benefits kind of thing. And my friend Sharon Hyman, she's a Montreal filmmaker who has a Facebook page called Partners, which is very clever. That's what she calls living apart together. And she's making a film about a partners.
Partners.
Yeah, isn't that great? She has been with a partner for, I think, 25 years now. And she's like, what, friends with benefits? We're the executors of each other's estates. We share this and that. I mean, those are some benefits. So, it's hard for people to wrap their head around not living with your loved one. So that's how we identify a committed couple. Another myth is that you're more likely to cheat. And I will say, I'm sure that people who live apart together sometimes do cheat on their romantic partner. However, most people live together. There are many more people who live together than don't live together as lats. And there's a heck of a lot of cheating going on, although we don't really exactly know how much because people aren't always honest about what they're doing sexually on their partners. But if you remember the Ashley Madison breach X number of years ago, where, a lot of people got caught on there, even though they were partnered or married. So we know that cheating exists and most people live together than not live together. So therefore, cheating happens. It isn't your living arrangement that makes that happen. It's who you're involved with. And it's more a matter of, can you trust your partner and do you trust your partner and are they worthy of your trust? And are you worthy of their trust? There you go. Because whether you live together or don't live together, if someone wants to cheat, they're going to find a way to cheat. It isn't any more likely to happen just because you're not sharing the same roof. Another myth is that you can't raise children together. Now, I'm not saying it would be easy to do, although in some circumstances it might be easier. And it's ridiculous to think as divorced people as a model of raising children when you don't live together. However, in a lot of ways it is. That's what my former husband and I did. And it was not unique to us. We lived close to each other, a week with their dad, a week with me. And, we were no longer in love with each other. But imagine if you shared the child rearing that way, or in whatever way you wanted to. Maybe they just stay at one person's house and, the other co-parent comes and stays and puts the kids to bed with you and bathes them every night and then maybe stays over and some nights doesn't. You can raise children. The family form doesn't really matter as long as the children's needs are being met. And what do children need? They need to feel safe, and they need to feel secure, and they need to feel loved. And that can happen no matter what the arrangement is. And another myth is that, that it's not eco-friendly. So it is true that if you have two separate spaces, you've got two heating systems and you have two refrigerators and you have two microwaves, whatever, all of the things that we use, and all of those take energy. And yes, if you have 3 or 4 people living under a roof, you are saving certain, environmental things, right? By not duplicating. However, what the studies don't do, and there haven't really been too many studies about this, but the studies don't, the one study I know of anyway, it doesn't take into account how people live. So let's say you are a couple living in a 2,000 square foot house. So yeah, maybe you're saving on the one refrigerator and the one heating system. But if that couple has a gas guzzling SUV, flies all the time for work or pleasure, goes out to eat at restaurants often, which is incredibly wasteful, eats a lot of meat, which is an ecological disaster, how are they more eco-friendly than someone living by themselves, or like the woman with other people who maybe walks, bikes, or takes mass transit to work, is vegan or vegetarian? I mean, you have to consider lifestyles. So just because you're living solo doesn't mean that you are any more wasteful or ecologically disastrous than people who are sharing a household. So, and those are kind of like the biggies.
Yeah, it's just one piece of the puzzle. I mean, you could be in 2 apartments next to mass transit, right next to each other, or a 5,000 square foot house in Arizona that needs to run its AC
Exactly.
all day, every day. So I love these myths. These are the myths. It's only
Yeah.
for the rich. You're just dating. You're more likely to cheat. You can't raise children together. And it's not eco-friendly. And something we haven't quite covered is whether or not this creates or accelerates disconnection. Like imagine 2 spouses who've never talked about this, and one goes to the other one saying, I think we should live apart. That sounds to me like breaking up. And I do think there is some concern around drifting apart, and breaking up, and that this physical separation is going to create emotional disconnection.
Okay, so the divorce rate is down, but the only group where the divorce rate is not going down is with people in their 60s and older. We've seen a whole bunch of people after like 20, 25-year marriages get divorced, like Al Gore and his wife, and Bezos, and all these lots of people. And a lot of it is just, we drifted apart. See, okay, so these are people who've been together for a long time, and we've drifted apart. Drifting apart happens in long-term relationships. And so what is maybe counterintuitive is that if you are living separately from your partner, you have to work harder. You can't be complacent about your relationship. You can't put it on autopilot as many people who live together do in long-term relationships. You have to learn how to communicate well. You have to work at maintaining intimacy, especially if you don't see each other all that often, you know. You have to uh, you have to build trust, and be trusting. So you really have to put effort into your relationship, which when you're living together, often people don't. People talk about the work of a relationship, and often they don't do it because you don't really have to do it when you're occupying the same space. And also, when you're living with someone, you are constantly aware of all of their negatives. Like the toothpaste cap is off or the toilet paper is on the wrong way. I was a pile maker in my marriage, and it drove my former husband absolutely friggin' crazy. He hated my piles. So, when you don't live with your partner, you're not thinking about all the things about them that bother you. You're actually thinking about how much you miss them and all the things that you love about them that you want to keep connected to. So, many more people live together than don't live together. And we see a lot of people disconnect after many, many years of being together. And so therefore, again, it kind of proves the point. Living together does not, there is just as much cheating or maybe more. And there's just as much disconnect and probably more because you can become complacent.
Yeah, it's such an interesting distinction because my kind of light bulb moment listening to you is that you can be compatible to be in a relationship with someone in a lot of different ways, right? You can have sexual compatibility, political compatibility, and what I'm almost hearing from you is that maybe you're 95% compatible, except in the living together portion of your life. One person's messy, one person's not, one person's this, one person's not, and if you take that out of the equation, it's actually a really positive thing in your relationship.
It can be, yes, absolutely. And I know it seems kind of silly, like, oh, really? You're going to not want to live together because one's messy and the other's not? It's like, well, you can live together, sure, but if that mess is going to bother you all the time, how is that going to play out in your relationship? I mean, someone's going to have to go, all right, I give up, and sometimes giving up your feelings about something you feel strongly about makes you resentful. So, and also, not everybody is good at living with other people. I mean, some people are neurodiverse and it makes living with another person hard, I know someone whose partner has OCD. And there's nothing wrong with him. OCD is a mental illness that a lot of people have. It made them living together hard. So rather than try and break up because we're not compatible, rather than try to squeeze into a narrow version of what a romantic relationship, quote unquote, looks like and think something's wrong with me, when really maybe it's the structure of the relationship that actually isn't working. And I do have someone in the book who the marriage was struggling. And so she bought herself a condo not far from her husband, and it basically saved the marriage. And she considered buying the condo as an investment in their marriage, not that it was disconnecting them. It made their marriage better. And, divorce is expensive and it's hard. And if changing the structure of your relationship, your living arrangement would make it better for everybody, I don't see why it wouldn't be a consideration. Yeah. Like what are you willing to do to maintain your relationship? Because you love the person, but living with them is hard, right?
Absolutely. Are there some other advantages of living apart that we haven't quite covered yet?
Oh, well, there's so many. um, you know, it does. Okay, well, first I need to preface it by saying, one, it's not for everybody. Okay, it just isn't. If you have trust issues or jealousy issues or you have an insecure attachment, or you just really like living with someone all the time. There's many people who like that. It's not going to really work for you. And if only one of you wants it and the other is not really sure or doesn't want it, that's not going to work. And I'm also not saying that it's better than living together. It's just an option. So for some people who really want to have a sense of freedom and have a committed relationship, it really works well. As a matter of fact, I can't really think of any other romantic relationship lifestyle that offers you a certain amount of autonomy and all of the commitment and good stuff of having a romantic relationship that most of us want. So it really works well for those people. And I will say that to one of the groups of people for whom this is very attractive is people like me in their 60s and older who have been divorced or widowed, mostly women. They're the drivers of this lifestyle, who don't want to replicate what they had. They really want their independence and they're not willing to give it up. So yeah, if you want a healthy balance of a relationship and freedom, living apart together is a wonderful thing. Again, as I mentioned, you tend not to focus on the negative and you tend to emphasize more of the positive. They say that you kind of idealize your partner, which doesn't sound all that great because you don't want to just see your partner in rose-colored glasses because that isn't authentic, right? Everyone has upsides and downsides. It's just that you don't focus on it as much and you do miss them and you do tend to think of all the things you love about them and it's great about them. And, who doesn't want that? It's a very nice way of being. And then, the time that you spend together is much more intentional. And so that can be more romantic and more passionate because you're choosing this time to be together and you're planning what you're going to do together and how you're going to spend your time together. And I will say that includes sex. People, okay, not everybody wants sex. This is true. But, people think, well, if you're sleeping in the same bed, obviously you're having sex. No. How many articles have we read in recent years about how many people are not having sex anymore or in sexless marriages? Okay, well, if you can't have sex all the time, you might want to miss it and you might want to have it the next time you're together with your romantic partner. So all the studies show that you are just as committed, just as loving, just as sexual, just as romantic, or even more so than people who live together. Because as I said before, you have to work harder at it. And when you work hard at something, you're putting a value on it. And that matters in how we think about our romantic partner. Yeah. We're saying this is the person I'm choosing to be with in this way, and we're working hard together to make this romance work. Yeah. So those are some of the big advantages, I say.
Well, it's very interesting how you mentioned a myth is that it's not dating, although it looks like dating because during the dating process, you are in two separate places and you go
Right.
visit each other a lot more often. And yet, a very common piece of advice you hear from couples therapists is to never stop dating your partner. Because what happens when you live separately, you're going to get dressed, you're going to buy some flowers on the way, prepare a nice meal for when your partner comes over. And when you do live together, it's so easy to get complacent when you don't have that process happening in your relationship.
Yeah. And Zach, I do have to say, so there's different types of people who live apart together and some actually are dating. I mean, I'm not in a romantic relationship right now. But I have been dating. And so I'm not the people I'm addressing in my book. The people I'm addressing in my book are people who actually are committed couples or poly people who, have romantic partners, they're in a committed relationship, and this is their lifestyle choice. So they're, usually the people who are living apart together, who are not really committed to the relationship, are younger people, they are dating. So some social scientists are making a distinction between like partner lats and, dating lats. And I think that's an important distinction, to say, because for some people, they are dating and maybe the goal is to live together at some part, which is more like of a long distance relationship more than lat. But my book is really for people who are want to choose this or considering choosing this as a lifestyle choice because they want that with their romantic partner. So important distinction to make. Yeah.
As we're winding down, I am curious. You mentioned that we have to work harder. You can't grow complacent. You have to put a value on your relationship. And I'm wondering if there's anything else a couple might need to do to ensure that a living apart together relationship works for them.
Well, an important thing to do is ask yourself, why would I want this relationship? Because what you want to do is clarify for yourself why you think this might work. And maybe this is coming after living with people for many years and deciding that that didn't really work. So, I mean, it would be a good idea to ask yourself that. And if you already have a partner, you know, to discuss that with them. If what do you think's working in our relationship? What's not working? If you were to do something different, what would you consider? Would you consider being in separate rooms or separate places, and so on and so forth? Because if you're already with a partner living together, it's a different conversation to bring up than one if you're have a potential new romantic partner and you say, I'm not really sure I want to live with someone. Because again, it's not that common yet. I think it will be more common at some point, but it's not that common yet. And so it still gets a lot of judgment from people. They don't understand it. Like, why wouldn't you want to live with someone? So you'd have to be very confident in yourself that this is what I want and this is why I want it. And, I have to admit that, sometimes people in live apart together relationships have ambivalence about it. Like, is there something wrong with me that I don't want to live with my romantic partner? And that's not a bad question to ask, although I wouldn't say, is there something wrong with me? It's like, why does this work for me? Is probably, or why would I like this? And also, there's ambivalence in all kinds of romantic relationships, right? How many people talk about the cold feet they have before getting married? Is this the right person? Am I doing the right thing? All romantic relationships have ambivalence baked into them. And so lat is just another way to feel ambivalent about things. So, but really clarifying for yourself why you might want it and talking with a romantic partner about why they might want it and is it something that we could do together is probably very important, because people are going to question, right? People are going to question it. And if you're not really sure why you're doing it, then you'll probably feel even more ambivalent and more confused. We have no problem understanding people who choose careers that keep them away from a family for a long time, like long haul truckers, right? They're on the road for weeks at a time, or pilots or flight attendants. They're often, flying internationally and they're away from loved ones, or maybe CEOs who work in New York and then fly home on the weekend back to California, as people I know do, or firefighters who are in the fire station for several nights every other week or something. We can understand that, or military people who are deployed, overseas for months or years at a time. So we can understand that. But for people to choose to not live with someone is like harder. But so yeah, you just want to check in with yourself. why this is important to you.
I love it. So I want to take a bit of a global look real quick. I know we're both writers, and us writers, we do kind of value the solitary lifestyle. I think
Yeah.
many of us would love to build a cabin, next to Walden Pond and just be in nature and write books and different things. But a big concern of mine in today's world is what some people refer to as the loneliness epidemic, and that we already live in a very individualistic and separated society, and we socialize with others less and less in person. We've lost community, we've lost extended family, and as a result, this has put the monogamous relationship bond as numero uno for many people's lives. Like, people tend not to have dear close friends, but at least they have one partner. So I'm curious your thoughts on whether or not we should be encouraging people to become even more isolated in their lives.
Well, okay, so I would not in any way, shape, or form consider living apart together as being isolating. Most people who live apart together are very engaged with family, with friends, with their communities. A matter of fact, as I said, for the demographic that this is very attractive to, which is people in their 60s and older. One of the reasons why they don't want to live with a romantic partner is because they want to not have to compromise their time with their children and grandchildren and with their friends, right? They want their committed partner to be in addition to what they're doing, not a takeaway. And so they guard their time with their friends and loved ones carefully. That is not isolating. Also, some live apart together people like the woman who lives in Novato in a co-community. She chose to be with a community, living with them. She's not isolated. She's separate from her romantic partner, but she is absolutely prioritizing not only her romantic partner, but also the friendships that the people she shares her home with. So it certainly is not an isolated thing. And just because you're living apart together, this comes in all variations on the theme. Some people see each other, they spend every night together, and then they go home to their separate places.
Have a good night's sleep.
And have a good night's sleep. So, it takes many, many forms and looks different for whatever works for the couple. But, I don't know if you know Bella DePalo. She's written Singled Out. She writes a lot about singles, and her latest book is Single at Heart. And she talks about how singles and even live apart together people are very, very, they're actually more generous with their time in volunteering and community rather than how people consider single people. And obviously Lat people are not single necessarily, and because they have romantic partners, as somehow being selfish. And her view of it is, take self-care is very important. And if living apart together is a way for you to replenish your own body and mind and needs so that you can be more present in the world, it's not selfish, and it certainly isn't isolating at all. Yeah.
I love that distinction because it's true. You might have a really good friend and then they fall in love with somebody, and then you're like, goodbye. Never going to see you again. You're going to move to the suburbs. You're going to spend only time with your family. So a lot of people too, that monogamous bond can be isolating from friends, family, and community that you mentioned.
That's absolutely true. And actually, they call marriage a greedy institution because, the couple tends to become very insular. And I married my best friend. Well, you had a best friend, and now where's your other best friend? The one that you don't see that much because you're spending all your time with your romantic partner.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Vicki Larson, for coming onto the show. I do have to finish by asking the question I ask all of my guests, which is, what do you wish everyone knew about love?
Oh, well, I personally think Romantic love is wonderful. Love of all kinds. Romantic love is wonderful. I think there's many ways to have love beyond just romantic love in our life, and to be open to all of the possibilities of love as it presents itself, because it is there and you can create it if you choose to, and you can be open to it. But if you want to be open to romantic love, there's always the possibility that you will be hurt. I suppose in platonic and familial love too. Those can all hurt, but it's worth it. Yeah.
Be open to all the possibilities to love as it presents itself. Such encouraging words. Thank you so much, Vicki Larson, author of LATitude, How You Can Make a Live Apart Together Relationship Work. For our listeners who want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
Oh my gosh, I'm all over the internet, sadly. I have a website, Vicki Larson. I'm on all the socials, Twitter or X and Threads as OMG Chronicles. I'm on Instagram, somehow slightly on TikTok. But yeah, I mean, and I write for Medium pretty much weekly. And you know, I hope people will reach out if they have any questions or want to know more. Yeah, I'm out there.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Vicki Larson, for coming on to the show. I appreciate this educational and extremely hopeful way of working in relationships. As you mentioned, it's not better, but it can be very useful. It can save your partnership, save your relationship, and bring a lot of new, exciting energy and connection to one's relationship. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Zach, for having me on today. I really appreciate it. You've been wonderful to talk to.
And thank you, listeners, so much for listening. I hope you remember all of the valuable lessons that Vicki shared with us today, including the traditional relationship escalator isn't going to work for everyone. Living apart together is a rising trend for a lot of reasons, such as enjoying the freedom or just wanting better sleep. There are a number of myths around living apart together relationships, including that it's only for the rich, that you are more likely to cheat, and you can't raise children together. Those are all untrue. But if you do want your living apart together relationship to work, you have to work harder. You cannot grow complacent. So romantic love is wonderful, and there's many ways to love beyond it. So be open to all the possibilities to love as it presents itself. And remember, you are perfect just the way you are. You are lovable, loving, and loved.
Thanks again for listening to the Learn to Love podcast. To learn more about the show and your host, head over to zachbeach.com or theheartcenter.com. You can also follow Zach on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.